Hey Vikings Nation, what's up? Let's talk real football today, because sometimes the loudest stories aren't told in press conferences, they're told in snap counts. And right now, there's a quiet but powerful message coming out of Minnesota when it comes to the offensive line and one young name in particular. I'm talking about opportunity, trust, and what it really means when a coaching staff shows you where you stand without saying a word. This is one of those Minnesota Vikings news stories that doesn't scream at you, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. So stay with me because by the end of this video, you'll have a very different perspective on Walter Rouse, the Vikings' offensive tackle depth, and what could be coming next in the trenches. What we saw during minicamp at the Minnesota Vikings training facility tells us more than just who was running drills. Donovan Jackson and Walter Rouse were grinding through technique work, footwork, and fundamentals, trying to carve out their place in a league where nothing is handed to you. The NFL is ruthless like that. You don't earn respect with words or draft pedigree. You earn it with reps, snaps, and trust. And for young linemen especially, every practice is an audition. That's why the actions surrounding Walter Rouse matter so much more than anything said publicly. Because in this league, silence can be louder than criticism. Let's rewind to the 2025 season, a year Vikings fans won't forget when it comes to offensive line chaos. Injuries, inconsistency, and breakdowns up front became a weekly storyline, and eventually, the turmoil cost offensive line coach Chris Cooper his job. Depth was a massive issue, especially at offensive tackle. Every fan could see it. Every analyst talked about it. The need was obvious. And yet, despite that glaring need, Walter Rouse barely saw the field. That's where the real questions begin. Rouse arrived in Minnesota under modest expectations. He was a sixth-round pick, acquired after the Vikings traded Ezra Cleveland to the Jaguars back in 2023. That trade made sense at the time. Cleveland was approaching a new contract, the Vikings needed cap flexibility, and Dalton Risner was ready to step in as the starting left guard. Minnesota turned a financial decision into draft capital. With that sixth-round pick, they selected Walter Rouse, a developmental tackle, a future depth piece, or at least that was the idea. No one expected fireworks from Rouse as a rookie. Sixth-round linemen usually take time, especially offensive tackles transitioning to NFL speed and power. The Vikings even talked him up internally, praising his work ethic and physical traits. But praise in the offseason doesn't guarantee opportunity on Sundays. Still, heading into 2025, expectations quietly rose. With Christian Darrisaw locked in at left tackle and Brian O'Neill holding down the right side, there was optimism about the stability of the offensive line. Of course, there was one major caveat. Christian Darrisaw was coming off a serious knee injury. Even with his elite talent, depth behind him mattered more than ever. This felt like a moment for someone like Rouse to step up. A chance to prove he could be the next man up if needed. But then free agency happened and everything shifted. The Vikings signed Justin Skule, and the message was clear. Skule wasn't brought in to compete for a roster spot. He was brought in to be OT3. That decision alone told us where Rouse stood on the depth chart. From hopeful backup to OT4 almost overnight. Still, there was a path. Injuries happen. Rotations change. Opportunities emerge in the NFL when you least expect them. For a brief stretch, it looked like Rouse might get that chance. He appeared in 7 games during the 2025 season, with his most significant action coming in Week 8 against the Chargers. That game was rough. A 37-10 loss where nothing went right for Minnesota. Rouse logged 40 offensive snaps and a few on special teams. Blaming him for the outcome would be unfair, but the tape mattered. And apparently the staff didn't love what they saw. After Week 8, everything changed. Walter Rouse dressed for just one more game the rest of the season. In Week 17 against the Lions, he didn't take a single offensive snap. Only 5 plays on special teams. For a young offensive tackle, getting phased out like that is a red flag, especially when your team desperately needs help up front. What made it more telling was who the Vikings turned to instead. Blake Brandel, a former college tackle who has become the ultimate utility lineman, was asked to handle snaps at offensive tackle. Brandel isn't flashy. He's versatile. He's reliable. And most importantly, the coaches trust him. But here's the key question. Vikings fans, wasn't that supposed to be Walter Rouse's role? Even more concerning was the fact that the Vikings leaned on Michael Juergens, another 2024 draftee, for help along the interior offensive line at different points. That tells us something important. When Minnesota needed bodies, they looked everywhere, but rarely to Rouse. In the NFL, depth charts don't lie. If you're not the next option when the team is desperate, it says a lot about internal evaluations. This isn't new territory for the Vikings. We've seen this movie before with offensive linemen who didn't quite fit the long-term vision. Vidarian Lowe, another sixth-round tackle, was eventually traded to New England for a sixth-round pick, effectively canceling out the original investment. Then there's Ed Ingram, a second-round guard who was shipped out for a sixth and went on to thrive with the Texans. Sometimes, a change of scenery changes everything. So now the big question hangs in the air. Is Walter Rouse next? The Vikings have shown they're not afraid to move on quickly if they feel a player isn't developing the way they hoped. And with major roster decisions looming in the coming weeks and months, Rouse's spot feels anything but secure. The harsh reality is this. Minnesota needed offensive tackle help late in the season and still chose not to suit Rouse up. That's not about injuries. That's not about patience. That's about confidence or the lack of it. When you're not even wearing shoulder pads during crunch time, you're skating on thin ice in this league. Walter Rouse is just 24 years old. He's massive at 6 feet 6 inches and 330 pounds, with the physical tools teams dream about. But potential only matters if it turns into production. The clock is ticking. If Rouse can develop into a reliable OT3, this pick suddenly looks smart. If not, he may become another footnote in Minnesota Vikings news history. Now I want to hear from you, Vikings fans. Do you think the team has already made up its mind on Walter Rouse? Or is there still time for him to turn this around? Should the Vikings be more patient? Or is it time to explore trade options like they've done before? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the trenches, smash that like button, subscribe for more Minnesota Vikings news, and share this with a fellow fan. Skol, and I'll see you in the next one.